One.
Hello. Hello. Those applause make me feel like I'm official out here. Hey, everyone. Happy Saturday. It's August 9th, 2025. For those of you who are listening in the present, we may have some people who listen in the future, and I appreciate all listeners. My name is Shaquana. For any of you who are new, and I am the host of the Dragon book show. I started this book streaming show this year, a couple of months ago, so we're still new. Just sharing my love of reading thought provoking, interesting, enjoyable books is one of my hobbies and pastimes, but it's also just so much good literature out there. I think when I think about the different mediums of arts and culture and entertainment, I have to say books are kicking some butt. And, we it's tough because everyone, reading takes a lot of time. But when I compare it with other mediums like social media or even the movie medium, books kick butt. Because when you read some of these books that are out now, wow. It just doesn't compare to how the movies are. Now, there's a lot of great shows. I enjoy a lot of the shows that are streaming, but where's the originality with the movies? And they are in these books. So I invite you to consider like reading, but here's the thing. My show, I want you to get the word out. It's not just for readers. What I'm doing is I review books and I discuss them from a broader perspective so that even if you didn't read the book, I still would love for you to jump on and join me in the conversations because I don't do spoilers in case you do want to read them. And a lot of times, the themes and the topics that these books are about and are exploring are things that are just interesting for us to talk about. So, which leads me to today. We're going to get into. So, I'm reviewing two books that I read recently. Two really great books that are extremely different. A lot of times, the way that thank you, Dej. The way that I like to form these episodes is I usually do themes. So I read so vast from so many different types of books, from memoirs to historical fiction, different genres, you know, futuristic, mood based, um, spanning countries. So I get these themes that, like we did in June, which was Black Music Month, and I discussed quite a few books that I've read by and or about Black musicians. So today, recently, I read these two books, King of Ashes by S.A. Cosby and The Girls Who Grew Big by Layla Motley. I'm going to get into both books individually, but a combination of the books that these two stories, the plots, and some experiences that I've had recently this summer in traveling made me want to bring this episode to you all, called Stories That Illuminate Contemporary Life in Rural America. And I've been thinking about this a lot. We spend a good amount of time, the various mediums of art focus on city culture. and urban environments. And yet, we don't really hear as much about the rural life in rural America. But yet, when you travel, you see that there's many people living in towns, smaller towns, and they're humans, and their lives are interesting. They have challenges that I want to get into, the way that America has changed and continues to change, and how it impacts these rural towns, these rural areas. So that's a common theme that these two very vastly different books get into. So let me show, I'm going to start off with, I want to show you the title pages in a moment. If anybody's out there, please say hello, join me in the chat. Okay, so to look at those covers, S.A. Cosby, King of Ashes, and The Girls Who Grew Big. Phenomenal covers. All right, so I'm going to get into Layla Motley first, the girls who grew big. Layla, I actually read her first book, Night Crawling, earlier this year as well. I didn't even know it was a Oprah book club selection. And this young lady wrote this book at 19 years old. She was born and raised in Oakland, California, and was named the city's youth poet laureate at 16. And she was 19 when she published her debut novel, Night Crawling, which was longlisted for a really fancy book prize. So she's an acclaimed poet and writer. And Night Crawling got into this young lady who was being a sex worker to save her family. But The Girls Who Grew Big was about teen pregnancy. So it follows these three teen mothers or moms to be that are living in a small coastal town in Florida called Padua Beach. And let's see, because I even have a map here of, yeah, so that's some of the themes that the book gets into: identity, teen pregnancy, forbidden relationships, rural life, poverty, friendship, adolescence. There's others. I would love to know, if you're listening now or in the future, if you read this book, what are some other themes that you felt this book captured? But those were some of the stronger ones through the story. Also, with her being a poet, it was very descriptive, very well written. But it follows these three girls, and Simone, Adela, and Emery. And they are in the ages of 16, 18, and 20. Simone is one of the key voices that you hear come through. And by the way, I listened to this and I really did enjoy listening to it in audiobooks. I I do all three. So I read physical books, I listen to audiobooks, I also read ebooks, which is the least favorite of mine because I don't really like reading a book on my phone, but there have been a couple of books this year that I read that way. But this one I listened to in the audio and I really enjoyed the person that narrated it. So anyhow, Simone is 20 years old. She was born and raised in a small town in northern Florida that is, from the way it was described, like in the Florida Panhandle, which is the northwestern part of the state. And I did some research on that part of Florida, and it's known to be it's like the South. So you know how when people think of Florida, they think Florida is Florida, and it has somewhat of a different culture. But here, many people have noted in different articles I read that this part of Florida makes you feel like you are in the deep South because some of the culture and the norms and the customs are like that those of people living in like Georgia and Alabama because of where it's located. But it's one of those, towns that lost a it's not, it's kinda desolate, but it does get some people coming through the beaches. So they really rely on, like, ecotourism. So Simone, gets pregnant as a teen, and her family kicked her out of their house. You know, they disowned her because they were really disappointed in her getting pregnant at a young age. So she's living sh out of her car. She finds a way to get a truck and ends up having a set of twins and births them on her own with her boyfriend, and she's raising them. Over time, she forms a community with all of these young mothers, all these mothers that end up getting outcasted by society. They come together and they form this community where they're helping each other raise their children and looking out for one another. Um, Emery is another girl who is 18, and she's a white girl. She got pregnant by actually Simone's brother, you know how these small towns are, and her family disowned her for two reasons. One, she got pregnant, and two, she got pregnant by a black guy, so they didn't like that. So she was hanging on by a thread. And yet she still had these desires to go to college and graduate. She was very interested in ocean ocean studies. She would go to the beach and look at the animal life, and it was something that she wanted to study. And she was very smart, but she was being dissuaded by the counselors and the teachers because she had a child. And she applied to prominent universities and got accepted. And so she was at the crossroads as to if she was going to be able to go away to school or not. And then it gets into Adela. Adela was the youngest one. She was 16. She was living in a northern suburb. Her family was well to do, and she was in a biracial family. And when she got pregnant, her family, her parents, her father, they wanted her to, they didn't want her to stay in the town because that brought shame to them. So they sent her down to Florida to live with her grandmother, who happened to be living in the same town. So while she was there, she met the other girls. And first, she met Simone's ex boyfriend. And yeah. So all of this stuff is stuff that's part of the description, which is why I'm saying it. I won't get into everything that happened in the book. But it's a coming of age story. You know, we're younger, and it was really something like I feel like I am rooting for these young ladies. Let's see here. So next slide. So I got into Florida, and I described all of the girls. The town thinks the girls have lost their way, but really they're finding it, looking for love, making and breaking friendships, navigating the miracle of motherhood and the paradox of girlhood. And that's part of the description of the book. Um, I found this when I was doing some research on it, this great article on the author on how she found each character's voice, because the characters were very distinct, very well, like you felt I could explain Simone. Like Simone is tougher, but she's tender at the same time. And Adela was very dreamy. She actually had a lot of feelings, complex feelings. And the writer said that she went through a process of creating 3 first-person perspectives of the girls and similar demographics. But each of them has a different perspective and a different kind of foundational sense of the world as she interacts with pregnancy and parenthood. And she wanted it to be she wanted us to understand that there are a lot of ways to be a good mother and that teen parenthood isn't monolithic and it doesn't just look one way. It exists across race, class, and geography. And I think this is also a tender issue for me because I was born to a young mom. My mother had me at a young age. So, and I know that sometimes I just think, wow, to be 17, bringing another child into this world, what does that do for your body? How does your body feel now that you are sharing it with another being? And the reason why I um Yeah, and Deja, she was talking about it's so interesting how these towns shame them so badly when really states like Florida have such terrible sexual education in schools to prevent things like this from happening to young people. Thank you for your comment, Deja. And it is true. And they get into that in the book about one of the young ladies ends up pregnant. So what does she do? Because they also have change their abortion laws. But I want to get into a point that was a very big part of the reason why this book was written. Layla was saying, I think we've been taught that teen pregnancy is a moral issue. And as we see declining rates of teen pregnancy, we're taught that this is a win, which in some ways then implicitly implies that young pregnancy and parenthood is a failing, and it's not. And I am not saying that I don't think we should promote teens, being mothers, because there's a lot of research on socially and um, safety wise and economically what that does to women. But I also do agree with what Layla's saying about the moral issue. In this book, these girls were shamed, and that shame they carried with them. And I grew up in an era where teen pregnancy was way stronger than it is now. I've got some slides here that show teen births in the US have falling to record lows as overall total drops by 2%. So, there was a time in the 90s when teen pregnancy was huge, and in the community I was living in, I came upstate to live here in Rochester, and some of the zip codes were the highest in the state. Remember they had that whole "Not Me, Not Now" campaign? So they drilled into us, "Don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. Whatever you do not get pregnant as a teen." And they were trying in their way to and it worked because look, it's declined. But what about all that blame and shame? What about that? The blame and shame that we were drilled into, the judgment, whether or not we got pregnant as teens. And I'm talking as a collective, as those of us who were in that generation of being taught that it's a moral problem, that you're committing something morally wrong. And what's also ironic about that is that we're a very Christian based country, and Mary was a young mom, right? So, why such a harsh, lashing, vilifying of this? So, that part of the approach is something that was damaging and that I think we should unpack. What do you guys think out there if you're listening to those? And I think, it's something that we don't talk about as much. The teen birth rates have gone. Now, in that though, even though a lot of teen pregnancy has declined, there are still hot spots in the country where it's higher. And it tends to be in a lot of these rural towns. I I couldn't remember. I thought I had it listed the top states. So the U.S. teen birth rate fell. They declined from 15 births per thousand to 14 births. Reasons for the decline are not totally clear. Evidence suggests they're due to more teens abstaining from sexual activity and more sexually active teens using birth control. Although steadily declining, the US teen birth rate is higher than in other income countries. Additionally, rates vary from ethnic, geographic, and socioeconomic groups. And it's 24 for non Hispanic, uh, Indian, Alaskan Native females, non Hispanic, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, and 22 for non Hispanic Black females. So 140,000 babies are birthed to teens in the United States. So when we're thinking about our country, all of us, sharing this land, there's 140,000 and they're often isolated and shamed. And we are at a time where a lot of healthcare has been stripped. Medicaid is being cut, which is a area that, some of these younger mothers and children would have received health care from. Primarily, Medicaid tends to be heavily children on it. So, and, there's parts of the country where they really rely on having like healthcare safety nets. So I wanted to put this question out there as I read The Girls Who Grew Big and their individual stories. How can our society evolve views of young mothers as shameful while continuing to address teen pregnancy? And Deja, she brought a great point up about the education. But how do we as a culture change our views? I think reading, when you read books like this, you see a different empathy. That show, Teen Mothers, didn't help. It was, I think, exploitive, and I wonder how a lot of those girls are faring now. Does anyone know if there's been any follow up to any of those girls that was on those shows? There's a book that I have on hold at the library called Girl on Girl, and I'm going to read it. If it's good, I'll cover it. But the title, the book is getting into how around the 90s to the 2000s, there were these pop cultural uh, shows and that depicted girls. It was supposed to be empowering, but it put a lot of weird messaging out to a whole generation of girls. And it gets into some of these shows and things like that. So I'm going to read that, bring that here to see if we can discuss it. But one of the shows I think about is Teen Mom, because they weren't really, they are making a show covering the original season of Teen Moms, looking at their lives now. Oh, thank you, Dej. Huh. All right. I want to see that because it seemed like it wasn't really doing anything, but just making them out like they're the scum of the earth. Like I said, there's a lot of negativity around this. And there may be a time where we just treat each other with more love and empathy for people's individual journeys into motherhood. I think that we continue to try to prevent it but we also hold space for people's journeys because across time, women had children younger. Not that I'm not for children having children, but younger was a natural part of life, and it still remains to be a natural part of life. So it's some are having them older, some are having them younger, but we don't have to have this much shame and isolation for them. So, but yeah, I want to check that show out. So the Girls Who Grew Big, I gave it 4 stars. Incredible book. If you're looking for, I think this would be a great one for, I'd love to see some young men read it. Love to see that because I think that would be a great way as we're talking about building empathy in our boys and men. Check that book out. I think that's a good one. All right. So, any comments out there? I'm going to give it a sec. Angelina, I took a course on this over the summer. I noticed that early 2000s media really pushed the slut shaming narrative, which demonized female sexuality and turned teen pregnancy into a taboo topic. Hmm. Wow. What an insightful comment, Angelina. These college girls. Wow. Yeah. There was a lot of that happening, and they got rich doing it. Yeah. And we still are seeing that happen. Thank you for your comment. So now we're moving to King of Ashes.
Wait, we got one more comment coming.
Okay. Let's look at these. Um, give it a sec. Lala, my husband and I have conversations about anti-teen pregnancy era. The larger message was purpose to decline families and get more women in the workforce so government could get more incomes. That is a very interesting view. Hmm. Yeah, because it extended into younger women like that might have been in like the early 20s, which is now that's even rare to see. So and also we as a society should look at it this way. When you have a child as a teen, that means the mother will be around and healthy for such a long time. They will have their moms for years to come. So in many ways it's more beneficial for the kid to have their mom around longer. Wow. I experienced that because my mom, like I said, was a younger mom. She was a teen, but her mother wasn't a teen, but she was younger. And then her mother was younger. So at one point when I was pregnant with my daughter, my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother were all still alive. And there were 5 generations of us existing still. And it is a change. You're not going to have that the way that we have evolved as a society. So you gain things and you lose things. The reason why they were trying to have it decline was because, the girls, all the research about girls getting pregnant as teens and how it cut their lives. It could limit them economically, limit them socially, deem them in poverty, the health challenges if they're too young and they're not getting the health care. So all of those seemed like they were pariahs to society. And then we pushed and pushed for these declines to happen, not even just for the teens, but for like younger women. And now we're in a different time and fertility rates have declined. And so now we're going doubling back, not pushing teen pregnancy, but saying, and even now the new administration wants to provide financial incentives to women to have children. And I think they're not, you got to be more comprehensive in how you address the challenges because giving somebody $5,000, That's not even paying for diapers. We got to address universal child care and education and the health care, the health disparities from maternal mortality. The United States, we have some of the highest rates of infant and maternal mortality in the world. And we are supposed to be the number one. So, really, we're thumping our chests as the number one, but piss poor health outcomes. So, how do we improve that? Lala, remember MTV and all the shameful teen pregnancy? Now the nation needs more babies. Crazy, but it's full circle. Thank you for that comment. Right. Yeah. And so, what's going to happen now? So, let's look at how the messaging is going to change as with this administration and the times we're in now. How's it going to change the messaging, and then how do we continue to support families and people's individual journeys into or not in motherhood? Any other comments before I move on to King of Ashes? Loving them. And please, I appreciate you liking and sharing this episode. All right, so now, King of Ashes. S.A. Cosby. Uh, do y'all remember back when, when you knew an album was dropping or you knew a movie was coming out? I actually knew when this book was dropping. I haven't yet gotten to the level of getting these books sent my way. I think some bookstagrammers get that, and some of them do that full time. As you all know, I work in corporate full time, so this is a true hobby and a passion of mine. But I am building up this book lifestyle. So anyhow, I knew when this book was dropping. I was that excited about it, and it came out June 10th. Once again, this is another one that I like to listen to because S.A. Cosby, let me just back up. So he is a crime novelist. And I just discovered him a couple of years ago because I was listening to this short story called Broke Down Profit. And I was listening to it on Audible. Charlemagne, the God, he helped produce it. And Jonathan Majors was one of the authors, but it was like a short story. So it was about 4 hours. I was up one night listening to it. I was like, this is really good. Who is this author? And then I was like, what rock was I under? So I read Razor Blade Tears and All the Sinners Bleed and all his various books. So this is his latest one that came out. And it's really, really good. Themes. He writes, he's from Virginia. I believe his wife and him are in the funeral business. And the other thing that I like about his story is I love to see people who get success later in life. Like he was working at like an everyday person. But he started writing these books, and now they oftentimes Barack Obama has picked his books. I wouldn't be surprised if King of Ashes is on his summer reading list. He usually drops his around August. It might be out, but like last year and the year before, all of S.A. Cosby books were on Barack's list. And so he's excited. I saw an interview he did on Jimmy Kimmel show with Questlove. He's really getting that publicity, and it's well deserved. His stuff is really, really good. So let me get to the description of this. A Virginia man is sucked into a brutal drug syndicate and the fitfully inspired crime novel from bestseller Cosby, Of All the Sinners Bleed. After a long decade, Atlanta finance manager Roman Carruthers returns home to Jefferson Run, Virginia, where his father is in a coma after a suspicious car accident. When the accident gets linked to his younger brother Dante's drug dealing, Roman offers his financial expertise to the Black Baron Boys, a gang led by brothers Torrent and Tranquil, who are as inclined to murder Dante as to let Roman help settle his several $100,000 debt. Engaging with criminals set Roman on a path of escalating violence that builds to a tragic near Shakespearean crescendo. Meanwhile, Roman and Dante's sister Nevaeh reinvestigates the still unsolved disappearance of their mother a decade earlier. En route to the novel's tragic finale, Cosby hits some off notes. So, Roman's passage from rescuer to it's just incredible. So, in this story, you're getting rural life again, theme of my show, my episode, family conflict, sibling issues, economic limitations, crime, and substance abuse. So the guy that's the main character, he finds out that his father was hit in a coma. So he rushes home to this part of Virginia, and his younger brother is in debt with these really mean bad men, and they're going to kill him, and they're going to kill they were the ones that ran his father off the road, so they're not playing. So Roman is a money man. He's down in Atlanta. He makes the athletes and the ballers and shot callers a lot of money, so he wants to use that gift to try to get his brother out of this situation. And so I'm very I love to see how siblings are willing to go out for one another and help each other. So he comes to his brother's rescue, but it's not that simple because once they find out the guys that he has this ability, they want to keep extorting him. And that's what leads into some other stuff. The other thing that was really good about the plot is it gets into like family businesses, and they own his father and mother had a crematory, and the his little sister was the one that had to keep things going because Roman went off to college. Dante kind of struggled because of some trauma that I won't spoil, but he had a very traumatic experience at a young age that just kept him stuck. So his sister is also really like in this, she's struggling too. I mean, she keeps the business going, but she's limited. She's like a side piece to this guy. She's limiting her life because she feels limited. And that's something that I worry about, and I think about. I hate any of us to feel limited, and that's one of the worst feelings, right? Like, have you ever been in an situation where you feel like you just limited? Yes, a crematory. They own a crematory. So, in this town, if the funeral homes, some funeral homes have their own crematories, some don't. And if they don't, and people want to cremate, get cremated after death, then they'll hire him. And so the business was booming. And in that town, what I'm getting ready to get into in a couple of more slides is how much the economic limitations of some of these small towns causes all this degenerative behavior, and we've got to do something about it. So in this was a fictional situation, but it's a lot of stuff that's happening in small rural towns. But this business, people aren't going to stop dying during COVID, before or after. So that's why a lot of times in those areas, funerals and funeral homes were recession proof, depression proof businesses. But they're very stressful. And I never read a book about the business side of it. I've read two books this year by Black authors, and both of them got into like both of them, the families ran funerals, but this was a crematory. And I won't spoil it, but this is what I'll say. These books are crime books, these S. Cosby books. They're not for the faint of heart. He goes there. And so they're really like page turners. But just imagine all the things that I described when I described the plot, and the fact that starts interacting with these very bad people, and the fact that his family runs a crematory. So you do the math about how you think this book was, but it was really good. I mean, it was in, you know. So once again, I think he's got some movie options. I believe the Obamas, you know how they have their production company. I think they're gonna produce some of his stuff. So I hope it does the books justice. Because, and you, I would say with these books, if you want to read S.A. Cosby, listen to them, because the guy they have is amazing. He's a really good narrator. Um, yeah, they just said it was gonna. This will make a cool movie. Yeah, it will if it's well done. All of his books. There's only one that I have not read yet out of his whole collection. So I got one more to read, and I would have read all of S.A. Cosby's books. But let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what's happening in rural America. Like I said, I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, we went down from Miss New York. I was down there with my daughter and my mom recently, and we were in like a small town in New York, Sugarloaf, and we were kind of riding through these smaller towns. And I've done this in other travels, and I just think, you know, it's we can't keep piling everyone into the same cities. The cities have become so outrageously expensive. And we have other parts of the country that has the space, but they've been zapped. And I really wish, you know, when the politicians, even the presidents at the presidential level, when they were talking about these debates, what about the investing in small towns, small town America, rural America? What about that as an issue? That you just crickets when it's critical to the country's continuation. Some people just say they're going to just die out. But what does that mean? I mean, even now with this new bill that passed, a lot of rural hospitals rely on Medicaid and as a funding source. So they're going to all probably close because they've been being gobbled up by larger hospitals for years, and they're slowly dying. That's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about telehealth. And in my day job, that's one of the big things that I do professionally is I work on telehealth programs and work with providers to bring members telehealth, because it helps people who don't have access living in rural areas and they can't get to urgent care or get to a primary care doctor's office. So I did a lot of research on rural. I came across this article, The 40-Year Robbing of Rural America. And in the article, the author, the economist, was talking about how there have been efforts by different capitalistic efforts have extracted the resources out of different rural towns and exploited them without reinvesting back in those communities. And one of the examples that was, there was a couple of examples, but one was banks. They were saying that in previous, like way back in the earlier part of the 20th century, you could go to get mutual savings in banks to power small towns and economies. and the directors contributed to like the local institutions, and they knew their clients. They would make loans and it would be based on trust. But when the 80s started coming along, they used private equity investors, and then they started making bigger banks gobble up smaller banks. That's why I don't like that song by Nicki. I don't, that came out, because I'm like, you're hearing these themes, and you're like, no, that's not good. A big bank shouldn't take a little bank. Directors and investors encourage giant regional banks to gobble up and shutter the local ones, then cashed in as shares soared 200 to 400%. And many people found themselves trapped in banking deserts, forced to rely on high cost check cashing outlets and payday lenders, which those are walking, that's like the mafia. Remember those payday loans? Now they cracked down on them, but around the 2000s, your money is tight. You try to take out a payday loan and you end up in debt forever, and they're seizing it. And it's because they didn't have those smaller banks in those smaller towns anymore. So that was one of the ways that big economy took from rural. The other example came from farming. And there were smaller farms in these rural areas that at this point are now being extracted by these larger farms and larger corporations without them investing back into the smaller areas. There's a quote by the Professor Mark Elderman, who wrote this story, and it says, "When communities go into decline, their tax bases suffer. The downward spiral affects people economically, emotionally, and politically. All the social and medical pathologies that people associate with inner cities, drugs, gun violence, domestic violence, diabetes, obesity, depression, are rampant in rural communities." So, just thinking about that, because like I said, even in a lot of movies and films, books, it's always urban, urban, urban. And we just got to remember we're in these rural communities, minorities, different groups are in these rural communities, poorer people, and indigenous people are still living in them, and they're being pushed back in. Let's see. Any comments? Let me stop, slow down. Rural towns need a balance of maintaining their cultural history while receiving more modern resources so these towns can remain stable. It's important to keep the countryside beauty while still keeping them up to date with the way the world is changing. We can't leave them behind. Wow, that's incredible, Deja. Get down. Why don't you join the Chamber of Commerce down there and try to see if you can help with these the towns down in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, and it's probably some other rural towns down there. But that's true. There's beauty to it. And I really got that appreciation being in Sugarloaf and seeing it, because usually, I'm a city girl. And I love the city, the energy of it. But I can appreciate different environments. And I think why I'm worried is that I just feel like we're not um, using our resources appropriately. And we have to, because climate is changing. It might force us to have to migrate to some areas that are rural. We might have to go back to them for water, for food. How are we going to live in these areas, or other people help them live in these areas, if there's no economy? Not only economy, culture, art. We can make these areas enjoyable. Sometimes you feel like people think they've just given up on them. But why not make them enjoyable again? And they're less expensive than urban. But people are not going to stay in those areas if there's nothing there. And that's part of where we are now. Those younger generations, they get the heck out of there because there's no jobs and economy. They want to meet some potential partners. Who are they meeting? They don't want to just marry their cousins, kiss their cousins. So, we got to make these places interesting. Country mouse, city mouse on Sesame Street. Guess they never did work that out. That's funny. Jamie on Twitter. Yeah. I forgot about that. Let's see. Yeah. There was another article, why rural community economic development matters. And they were talking about Appalachia. For too long, Appalachia, and by extension, America's small rural communities, have been largely left to experience their own slow decline and isolation, with many cultural and social ills following hotly on the heels of that undeserved distress. Given the challenge, some may be tempted to ask why rural community based economic development matters at all. And I really want to give props to the Miss New York organization. And I wonder if my Deja, if you can let me know this, do the other state title holders showcase like the rural areas of those states? Because one of our queens, Taryn Delaney Smith, who's very successful. She's an influencer and actress. When she was the queen of New York a couple of years ago, she developed a partnership with Amtrak and went throughout the whole state, went and visit all these small towns. And then she would use her social media. She's got 1 million followers on Instagram and TikTok. And she would show them these areas and these hidden gems of New York, hidden areas. And Amelia did it as well. She did a great job. The Abby, and now the current queen, is going to be doing it as well. And it's so cool. And I think that they are a blueprint for how other influencers and ambassadors can be helping to showcase how we can build up some of these smaller towns, maybe like highlight the artists that may live there. If there's some really amazing artists, or probably not athletes, but if there's athletes, those other states don't have a program like New York by Rail. So really, New York is the only one showing different sides of our state. Yeah, but I think the other states, Amtrak exists in so many other states. So it would be great if they gave credit, because I don't like when people steal people. You can copy someone, but give credit. So if they gave credit and said, New York, Taryn, Sloan's leadership were they, Taryn and whoever really birthed this idea. And I forgot the gentleman who's in charge of New York Rail, his name, but that was a partnership. Can it be replicated? Where are some other big Amtraks? Is there Amtrak down in Alabama? What about Georgia? So you get the point. Replicate the program and have ambassadors promote parts of these states that people don't really know about as much, that people can be living in DC and living vibrant lives in it. We got to figure this out. And I think that was something that reading both of these books, completely different stories, but both of them were set in rural life. They happen to be both also by, Black authors, one a man, older man, one a younger woman. So just real diversity of thought, because you're getting these different points of view. But the commonality that stuck to me was, wow, there's people living lives in these areas, and we don't give them as much attention as we do. We don't give them as much like FaceTime and the movies and the shows aren't always set there, and they're usually in urban. So I'm going to continue to read about, if as long as the book is good, read about like rural life in not only in the United States, but even in other parts of the world. And as you guys know, I love Caribbean literature, so I've read a ton of that, which we'll get into in some other episodes. So, what were some other pieces? There was this quote that I found by a gentleman named Garrison from the Appalachian Voices. And he said, I may be a bit biased, but I believe that America's small towns deserve the opportunity to be just as vibrant and alive as big cities. We owe it to our community's future. And he wrote a blog about what's going on in these areas and then how we can build them up. And he's living in one of them. He's a musician, he's a DJ, a writer, avid reader, and enjoys spending time with his wife, his dogs, and cats. So I'm out there. Anybody grow up in a small town or a rural town or visited? Did you have like a grandmother? Lila says Virginia has great train systems and can showcase VA more. Yeah. But what's so cool now is that we have um, social media. So we don't have to just depend on the same three or four news outlets. And I like that media more when it's just like everyday people really showcasing this in an authentic way. And I'm excited because I think that that's what's going to continue to happen, where people are going to move into some of these areas and create really nice communities. And then they're going to showcase it, and then it's going to bring other people. I just read about a community down in Texas that this woman started. She was older and she was struggling financially, and she was very worried about how she was going to retire and sustain herself. And she founded an area where affordable housing, tiny homes, and now people are moving, other women are moving to this area, and they're supporting one another and forming a community with these tiny homes, and living comfortable lives for themselves. So we're going to have to be creative because that's the way the economy, the administration is moving. So we want to push back and educate ourselves, but we want to live thriving lives. We didn't do all of this to not thrive. So one way is think creatively about living. And I also look at it as a service because we have migrants here. We have people coming and migrating in and out. Everyone cannot live in the same 5 cities. When we saw with COVID, people's lives were being wiped out in part because of the overpopulation. And it's just not really healthy. It's good to stretch, you need some space. So, but you don't want to be in these places and there's nothing going on and you're all depressed and getting on drugs or overeating and things like that because you're just so bored out of your mind. So let's make these places vibrant and figure out solutions. So anyone out there can weigh in on this. Do you have like a grandparent on some of these rural communities don't want to change? Someone said they want to keep older townships the way they are so they don't promote their towns to nations at large. Amen. I came across an article that was saying that um, back to Texas, not a lot of Texas in my conversation today, but it was an area, and Texas had the opportunity. The planners in this town knew that they were at a crossroads and they needed to do some diversity. They felt that diversity and promoting it, this is way before the whole woke time, But they knew this was like the 90s. They knew that if they didn't diversify their population and do some new things in business, that the town was going to decline. And to your point, Jamie's point, that town voted against their own interests. They would rather have that town die than innovate and bring diversity to it and allow for diversity. Because as we know, racial covenants had started in like the 50s, they were very prominent. So certain groups, blacks, were just not allowed in those towns. They couldn't buy homes and get FHA loans. And there's a great book, The Color of Law. Check that book out, and the author gets into all of the ways that indigenous Black Americans were totally left out of mortgages, especially during one of the times that so much wealth was gained through home equity. They were left out. So when people make these ignorant comments, they don't take into consideration that the United States did this. This was a policy, and it has lasting impacts, and we can talk about that in another episode. But yeah, they decided to vote against it. So that is one of the problems, and that's why there's another book that I saw. I didn't read it, but I saw the title, and it said dying towns. And what they were saying is exactly Jamie's point. These people want this. They don't want to change. They're not willing to change, and they're going to go out with this ship. So that's a legitimate point. I'm bringing this up as a let's build a new world, let's reimagine. But if you are a decision maker and that you're that strong against wanting some newness, and you're going to just let your town starve and rot, then unfortunately it might be a case where people just die off, and it doesn't change until a whole new generation comes through. Which I think. Yeah, I think it's going to come to that people, I don't know. Let me know what you think. So, yeah, the last question that I had was, how can we improve the quality of life measures for people in rural and small communities? And you guys answered some of those with showcasing them, but any other ideas of how we can support people living in smaller towns, or deal with the issues better? What about visiting these places, like doing some tourism? They've been saying that this summer international travel is down. Although you're seeing everybody traveling, but they're saying that due to tariffs and different, different factors, people's financial situations, they're not all traveling. Some are, but some are choosing not to. But for people that choose to not go and take like an international trip, what about taking a trip to a smaller town and figuring out something that you like if it's a hobby? Like my bestie was just talking about the rodeo, the black rodeo. And I was reading Tina Knowles' book earlier this summer, and that was a fond memory she has of growing up and going to the rodeo. She said it was amazing. So I don't want to go. I That would be something from a historical that I wouldn't mind experiencing. It's just that I have concerns about the way they treat animals. I know that that's something that I feel about the Kentucky Derby. So I don't know that much about how they treat the animals at the rodeo. But just to be able to understand it more and see the towns where it's at, especially if it's something interesting, I would be cool with doing that. But yeah, like that ecotourism, maybe in a smaller town, somewhere could be fun and could be a way to like bring economy to the town. I know with the Miss New York organization, that's one of the reasons why they pick these obscure areas to have the pageants, and then they promote the businesses in these areas because they need it. They need New York City doesn't need it. The Waldorf Astoria doesn't need it. But what was that area in where we were at where they had like those coffee shops and stuff? They really appreciate that. And maybe somebody would go to Sugarloaf. So I really appreciate you all today. I'm pretty much done with that. That wraps the show. Really, really enjoyed these two books. They're both highly recommended. Check them out. Tune in next week for next week's episode. I'm going to be going over this book called When Crack is King. It was really a compelling book about the crack epidemic. And I hope to have some guests on to talk about that whole book. So you can also see previous episodes on my YouTube channel through Sage Dragon. And I want to thank the Real HD Network for helping me to produce this. Shout out to my producer. Any last comments? I hope you all have a great Saturday. One comment just came through from Jamie who said social media can highlight some of the best and uniqueness of these smaller areas, all of the county fairs. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good way for us to do it, and then just meet people. Like I think we should stay open to having in real life conversations with people from different walks of life. It's still a great way to add to your life. If you haven't met a stranger or met somebody in 2025 yet, it's August. Try to strike up a conversation with someone or meet someone from a different background or a different town and just get to know them and ask them questions about how they grew up. And I think that's another way for us to build this empathy and also network with each other so that we can accomplish our personal goals. Any other comments?
Yeah, we got one more coming.
Okay.
All right.
A lot more blacks returning to farming, so we'll have to deal with these crucial issues. Yeah, right. That's true. If we want to be in the farms, we got to go in the areas where the land is. And some of us may want to invest in them. We want to support Black and Indigenous farmers. So we may want to go visit these places and invest in them so we can figure out that. I mean, there's the repurposing of all those plantations, those there's real reasons why we left these rural areas, and I'm not glossing past those. It's time for a change, and we have a right to the land. We have a right to be here. Um, those of us who are, this is native land, indigenous land. Some of us are descendants of indigenous people and indigenous and descendants of people who toiled the land. So we have a right to the fruits of it, all of it, meaning not just the cities, but the rural areas too. And so do others. Yeah, so I'm going to end on that note. I wish you all a very great Saturday, and I'll see y'all next week. We'll be talking about When Crack Was King. Bye.